Welcome to the 300th edition of Comment here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. 300 not out by the grace of God. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all my friends here in the studio who work with me and all those who have worked with me over these 300 editions. I'd like to thank all the callers, well, most of the callers over that 300 editions, and I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for watching. And I hope, God willing, for 300 more, at least. You can call me here in the big conversation, the great debate, at 44208-601-4555. You call us, we'll call you back, establish a clear line. And remember, if you get on the TV with me, the volume on your TV has to be down at 0, or no one will understand either of us, and I'll have to press swiftly on, more swiftly than I have been doing. SMS is 447800008066, and the email address is comment@presstv.co.uk. Now that the dust has settled in Tel Aviv, the dust, I mean, from the knees of David Cameron's suit trousers, because of course he's spent most of the time in what they call Israel, on his knees in front of the most hated, the most vile leader in the world. Benjamin Netanyahu is despised even in Washington, especially in the White House. But that didn't stop David Cameron from going the extra mile, using language that the United States government would never use, has never used, using language that no British Prime Minister has ever used, and language which goes way beyond what the British Foreign Office would recommend him to say. He threw himself in front of Netanyahu and endorsed effectively the criminal nature of that regime. Now, what do I mean? Well, he used phrases like, "I'm here to support the state that they call Israel, the national state of the Jewish people." This is a formulation that the ultra-right in Israel insist upon, that the Palestinians cannot possibly ever agree to, because of course it recognizes not only that the state of Israel, as they call it, will continue to exist, but has every right to exist, and that every person in that state who isn't a Jew is de facto, officially, a second-class citizen. There is no other leader in the world using that language except David Cameron in front of the Knesset in what they call Israel yesterday. He also said that he would oppose any sanctions, any boycotting of the apartheid state. This is the same man who's on his feet against Russia, threatening Russia with all kinds of EU sanctions, who has been on his feet imposing all manner of sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran, saying that boycotting what they call Israel will never work, and he will never support it. In fact, he called it vile. So it's vile for me to decide that in Waitrose I will not buy Israeli products as a matter of principle. That's vile. This he said whilst visiting on a deep red carpet which he had rolled out for Netanyahu, a state which is violating human rights day and daily, which is involved in a murderous blockade against people entirely at their mercy in the Gaza Strip, which is illegally settling whole swathes of illegally occupied territory, and which is in defiance of dozens, scores of United Nations Security Council resolutions seeking to govern their conduct. Boycotting them is vile and will never work, but boycotting Russia, taking sanctions against Russia, as previously against the Islamic Republic of Iran, Not only is that right, that's what David Cameron fights for. You really couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up that visiting a state which regularly invades and occupies its neighbour's territory, which holds hundreds of nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them. Yes, Mr. Cameron, easily to London. I promise you, easily. From Dimona to London is well within an afternoon's work for the apartheid state's nuclear strike force. This state, which holds hundreds of nuclear weapons illegally, in defiance of international law, unregistered, undeclared, uninspected, in a country that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, would never dream of allowing inspectors to come and see its works. That country you wholly support, in words and in deeds, and in words indeed that nobody else in the world is currently using. Now, I must tell you, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, as most of those currently interested in the Malaysian aircraft already know. I prefer to wait for the facts and wish the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and above all the Malaysians whose plane it was to ascertain the facts. I'm utterly uninterested in most conspiracy theories, but I got to wondering just exactly what impels, moves David Cameron to go to what they call Israel and behave in the way that he did over the last couple of days. It's not for votes. The number of supporters of Israel in Britain is tiny. It's really tiny. It's like, I don't know, the number of people who are Mormons, the number of people who worship at the so-called Church of Latter-day Saints. It's tiny. It's not for votes. So what is it for? It's not because it helps Britain's national interest, because it damages Britain's national interests. The 2 billion Muslims in the world heard David Cameron speaking in Tel Aviv loud and clear. So what is it? It's money. It has to be money. It's not ideology. Cameron has no ideology. It's not Britain's national interest, like Prince Charles went waving his sword the other day in Saudi Arabia. This was to boost British business. It doesn't boost British business lying down in front of Netanyahu. It's not about votes, so money is the only thing left. And I think it's about time that people paid closer attention to that question. Who's giving what money to whom and for what? Anyway, he says boycotting what they call Israel won't work. I know that it is working. The sanctions that ordinary people have placed on the products of these illegal settlements in what they call the West Bank last year cost over 100 million shekels to those occupiers. I know that individual sanctions against what they call Israel do work, and we must all press everyone else that we know to do the same. Now we come to the issue of Russia. The man who says sanctions won't work against Israel and are vile is threatening sanctions against Russia. Is Russia paying very much attention? Doesn't look like it to me. Only a few hours to the referendum in Crimea, entirely within the rights of the people of Crimea, who were given away without being asked by Russia to Ukraine in 1954. And at the time of talking to you now, live here on Thursday evening, I would think it looks a fairly safe bet that Crimea is going to vote to join Russia this weekend. And I don't think David Cameron's sanctions will do anything to stop it. Aidan is in London, always worth hearing, even disagreeing with. Aidan, welcome back to the show, my friend. Does boycotting what they call Israel work?
Yeah, hi George. Yeah, thanks for having me on this very special edition of Comment. I mean,
it is.
I think what you've just said was probably the best opening I've heard in the 300 episodes that I've been watching you, by far.
Thank you, brother.
The most. Yeah, that was, if there's ever a speech I had to hear in the last few days, that must have been it. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to air my honest opinion sometimes, even if at times I have been a bit over-emotional, and it's, you haven't agreed with me.
I get over-emotional too, Aidan.
Yeah, but it's all good. It's all good. It's all good emotions. I mean, to broadcast...
Our intentions are good, yeah?
Yeah, always. To broadcast 300 episodes of comment is by no stretch of the imagination a small achievement. This show truly gives a voice to the voices, and is an open lesson in freedom of speech to the so-called developed democracies, just like this Mickey Mouse one we have here in the UK.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank the Islamic Revolution, Press TV, but most of all, George Galloway, for fighting to keep this programme running for 300 episodes. God bless you, George.
Thank you, my friend. What a beautiful call to start out with. Thanks, Aidan. I really appreciate those words, especially coming from you, with whom I often disagree. Bani Mustafazi is in Sweden. We get around the world. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Bani.
Okay. Yes, good evening, Mr. George Galloway. Good to hear from you, like always.
Thank you, sir. Tell me, do EU sanction threats work?
Well, until the day we have this common sense who says we do what we want, you do what we say, we have to have this struggle. I don't believe so. I hope the Russians will remain firm in front of the, U.S. and their friends. They've been invading the world since 1980. Since I know myself, after the revolution.
They've been invading the world a lot longer than that.
Yes,
there's only, I think it's only 23 countries in the whole world that Britain has not invaded yet. Only 23 in the whole world that they have not invaded yet. And the United States has invaded 50 countries in the last 50 years.
All the way I agree with you. You are fully right. You are fully right. And I wonder how we can go on and confront these people. We need people more like you in the world, And therefore, I said maybe with this smart way of phones and whatever, to create this world parliament, and somehow with the petition to get these people off the world and, stop letting them to rule us forever.
Well, this is a kind of world parliament that we have here now. Aidan was in London, you're in Sweden. There'll be callers from all over the world this evening. Maybe we need to run comment twice a week from now on. Please note, in Tehran. Thank you, brother. Thank you very much indeed for calling. A special edition here, the 300th edition of Comment. Mohammed is on the line in Wales, and it's definitely always a pleasure to hear from him. Mohammed, welcome to the show, brother.
Good evening to you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. What it is, basically, our Prime Minister has gone over to Israel again. Basically the sanction works for others, but not for Israel.
Yes.
It's a double standard. All the time. When it comes to Israel, America, European countries, they are all hypocrites,
How do you think they square it in their own head, Mohammed? How do you think they square it in their own head? They must be aware that they're arguing for sanctions to force somebody to stop sending their army into somebody else's territory, and they will impose draconian sanctions if they don't. But somebody who for 60 years has had its soldiers on somebody else's territory is to be rewarded, and anyone applying sanctions against them is vile.
Well, what it is basically, this is what it is, because Palestinian, right? Okay, they are a very poor people, and so that is to them it really doesn't matter. Israel, like you say so many times, they got a Rolls-Royce voice body in the world, right? And soon as Mr. Cameron or any European leader say anything against Israel, everybody's on the phone to their MPs, right? and to Prime Minister, and also the big, large companies are phoning them, threatening them. So basically, that's what it is. They caught them by the...
Yeah, I wish it was... I wish
really.
basically that's what it was, Mohammed. But I'm not convinced. As I said earlier, it's not about votes, because the number of votes in this country that are in any way dependent on being a slave to Israel are very, 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 very small. Much smaller than the number of people whose votes could be won by taking the opposite point of view. Most of the media in Britain is not controlled by Jews, contrary to many conspiracy theories. Most of the companies are not controlled by Jews. Most of the banks are not controlled by Jews, contrary to many conspiracy theories. And in any case, many Jews in Britain are with us. So if it's not about any of those things, what is it about? And I'm starting to suspect it's about folding money. I bet you that some class of funding of the Conservative Party has been promised or is finding its way into the election coffers of the Tory election fund. That's the only rationale I can think of. And by the way, one of the reasons why I know it's not for votes is because all three parties, Labour, Liberal Democrat and Tory, are all virtually equally, slavishly supporting Israel. So it's not as if there's a differentiation between the parties. Do you follow me? Anyway, Mohammed, thanks for the call. As always, it wouldn't have been complete without hearing from you. Jacob is in London, and I always like to hear from him too. Jacob, go ahead.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much again for another very fantastic episode.
Thank you.
Good. This is wonderful that you're here, the voice of the voiceless. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What I want to say very briefly is about number one, about Israel. The fact is that many people don't understand that many people who have gone to Israel, they've tried to actually get out, but they've realized they cannot liquidate the finances to get out of Israel. Once you're in Israel, it's like a prison. You get stuck in there. Even if you're Jewish, you can't get out. So many people were tricked to go to Israel, and there's so much prostitution, so much drugs, so much horribleness that is happening in the state of Israel.
It's very ugly. It's a very ugly society in Israel, you know.
It's extremely ugly, and many people don't realize that many Jews are suffering at the hands of Zionists, and many people don't understand that Jews are actually the biggest stain on the Jewish society, the biggest stain on the Jewish culture is actually the Zionism. And before the Zionism, Jews were living side by side with Arabs, with Muslims, with Christians. There was no problem. Zionists came and said, no, you're not allowed to do that. You shouldn't live in London, in New York, in Iran, in Tehran. No. All of you should come to this land that we've occupied, and if you don't come here, then you're not a good person, you're not a good Jew. And that is what everybody was told, and now people have realized this is the trick. And about this David Cameron going there, and this nonsense that he's supporting Israel, he's basically preparing for his retirement. He's looking forward to become
maybe to be as rich as Tony Blair.
Exactly. I think he's looking forward to becoming non-executive, one of those useless jobs where he doesn't have any role except he just collects money.
Jacob, let me ask you this, brother, because it relates to what you've just said, and most powerfully coming from you. Is this one of the reasons why the Zionists sent gunmen to the Maidan in Kiev to help a revolution, which was the cutting edge of which and the heavy lifting of which was being done by actually outright Nazi anti-Semites? The bizarre alliance in the Maidan between former Israeli army officers who've spoken openly about their role in Haaretz and Nazis with swastikas on their arms, the most ugly alliance you could possibly imagine, is part of the thinking of this. Well, if these Nazis come to power in Kiev and they hate Jews so much, the remaining Ukrainian Jews will feel that they have to go and settle in Palestine. Is that part of the thinking?
Well, Of course, in order to understand what's happening in Kiev, one has to understand how the Zionists actually think. The thinking that they have got is not as smart as you may imagine, because they know how the people think. They think that they don't understand that people associate Nazism with being anti-Jewish, whereas Nazism and Zionism is exactly the same thing, is one and the same. If you turn the Star of David, inside the Star, every Star of David, there is a swastika. Swastika was based on the Star of David. They're one and the same. What has happened here, the Jews have become the victims of the Zionists, and the Jews are constantly getting it in the neck all the time. And now they've started on the Arabs and the Muslims. Exactly the same thing they were doing back in 1940s and 50s, saying, oh, Jews are being persecuted, but they were actually doing it themselves. And then they came over to Palestine.
Well, both of these things are true, Jacob. They were being persecuted, and the Zionists were quite happy about them being persecuted, because it suited their political agenda. Jacob, we'll have to continue this another time, because I have on the line Roshan Mohammed Saleh, our star reporter, who's on the front line in Crimea. Roshan, how are you doing? Can you hear me out there?
Yeah, George, I can hear you loud and clear.
Tell me, what's the situation on the eve of the referendum?
Well, the referendum's going to pass, George. Russia is going to join, Crimea is going to join Russia. There's no doubt about that. It's a foregone conclusion. I mean, this is a very kind of pro-Russian area. The people here are by and large ethnic Russians. They speak Russian as a first language. A lot of people have told me that, you know, Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine like giving his wife a box of chocolates.
Yeah, he was drunk. He was apparently drunk one night and did it.
I'm not sure about that, but the people here are very resentful that Crimea was given away to Ukraine. They don't really feel Ukrainian, they feel Russian. And they don't feel that this is an occupation of Russian troops. They welcome the Russian troops that are here. They welcome the pro-Russian defense forces that are here. And I must admit, I haven't seen any violence since I've been here. I've been all over Crimea. I was in Yalta today, where the famous Second World War conference was held. I went to Sevastopol, where the famous harbor is, which endured 2 sieges during the Crimean War and then by the Nazis. I've been in Simferopol. I've been all over Crimea, and I haven't seen any violence whatsoever. I know the Western media are talking about Crimea on the brink and violence breaking out everywhere, but I think the only people that are getting harassed a bit are Western journalists, and that's because they're Russia bashing. And if you do that, then, you know, people aren't going to like it. But I would say that people on the street are telling me that, the sentiment is that the Kiev so-called government is a coup government. It's full of neo-Nazis and fascists. They don't want anything of it, and they feel as though Yanukovych may have been a corrupt president. There's not much love for him even here in Crimea, but they say that ultimately he was a democratically elected president. He should have been allowed to finish his term. Putin had no choice but to move in because, ultimately it's a bit like a pro-Russian movement taking over Texas or Mexico. Putin had to respond because NATO wants to move into Ukraine. The EU wants to move into Ukraine, to surround Russia, to strangle Russia. So Putin had no choice.
And is it their view, and the people you're talking to, that it's a foregone conclusion that Russia will accept them in? Because, of course, Crimea voting is one thing, but Russia would have to then agree to face the consequences of taking Crimea into the Russian Federation. People think there's no doubt about that, Roshan?
There's no doubt about that. I think that, obviously the logistics, the practicalities have yet to be worked out. Some say that Crimea will be a burden on Russia, but it looks as though it's a burden, if you can call it that Russia is willing to bear.
Okay.
The media is saying that it's completely a foregone conclusion.
A done deal. Roshan, face the hardships of Yalta and Sebastopol with courage. It's a beautiful part of the world that you're in. I will be back, God willing, after just 3 minutes, after a short news bulletin on this, the 300th edition of Comment. We're discussing sanctions and boycotts of what they call Israel and of Russia. Don't go away. I'll be back in 3 minutes' time, God willing. Welcome back to the second half of what is the 300th edition of Comment here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. Calls coming in from all over the world. Literally, we are talking tonight about David Cameron's shameful performance in Tel Aviv, where he has only just settled the dust off the knees of his suit trousers because he spent most of it on his knees in front of Netanyahu, the most hated ruler probably anywhere in the world, but loved by the British Prime Minister. You really couldn't make that up. And we're talking about the contrast between the description of sanctions and boycott on the apartheid state being vile, but being actually the only language that's being spoken between the EU, the United States and Russia in the wake of the events which were provoked in the first place by the EU and the United States in the Ukraine. So, double standards or what? Salad is on the line in Mogadishu, in Somalia. Salad, welcome to the show, my friend. Can you hear me well?
Thank you, George. I'm really excited to take back the program.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk about the Russia and the U.S. Issue.
Oh yes.
The U.S. and Russia are two similar powers in the world, but somehow they are different. The U.S. think that they are the most powerful government in the world. They think that they are responsible for every issue and every government in the world. For example, they think through this to the governments in around the world, like Afghanistan, and they are, for example, troops of American in Somalia, in order to do their interests from that countries. But unfortunately, when Russia try to do their interests from a neighborhood country, the U.S. stood against in a conflict, and unfortunately, the U.S. thinks that they are responsible for the issue of every government in the world.
Indeed, indeed. They think that somebody, God maybe, gave them the mission to reshape the world in their own image. I was once on a radio program in Washington, Seattle, in Washington State, and the presenter of the program, whose name was Medved, so presumably of Russian extraction, but very much Stars and Stripes man now. He opened the show by welcoming all the listeners to this radio station on the greatest country in God's green earth. And I opened by saying, if you're the greatest country on God's green earth, that means my country and every other country is second best, at least to you. And it's because they really believe that we have this problem in the world. They think that they have the right to dispense judgment on other people in the way that the pirate captain accused so-called Alexander the Great of doing. As the pirate captain said, you who call yourself an emperor and call other men as you please. Salad, thanks very much for that call. We're discussing EU sanctions and the threats against Russia by Britain, especially hawkishly, and David Cameron has much to lose, of course, if all these rich young boys don't enroll in Eton next year, if Harrods and Sloane Square and Sloane Street are bereft of rich, big-spending Russian shoppers this year, if the London property market starts to see a flight of Russian property owners in some parts of London, well, my goodness, that'll suit quite a lot of people, including, as it happens, President Putin. Niall is in Dublin. Always a pleasure to talk to him. Niall, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Brother George. I feel it's a pleasure to be on your 300th show, it has to be said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, George, I just want to go back to the beginning of the show, you know, when you so clearly and concisely and substantially showed up the Western double standards in relation to Israel, the whole idea of sanctions against Israel, refusing to put sanctions on Israel, and rushing to the fore in relation to putting sanctions on Russia. You know, it's absolutely bizarre in that sense. And
it is. You know, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre, Niall. That's why I asked an earlier caller, what do you think's in their mind when they're saying this? I mean, if I was saying something that made me look such an idiot because of what I was saying about another place just yesterday, I would know it. I would know it in my mind. What are the journalists who listen to it? Why don't they say, but actually you said something different about Russia just yesterday? What do you think the thought process, Niall? Or do they just not care? Do they think we're all idiots and we can't recognize it?
You know, maybe they do think we're all idiots because, George, you know, I'm on this planet long enough to sift through all the BS that's been going on, you know, over that period of time, especially what's been happening in the media, you know, because the second argument is in relation to the territorial integrity of the Ukraine. Well, George, these are the same powers, these are the same countries that rid roughshod over the territorial integrity of Serbia back in 1999 when they illegally detached Kosovo from it through an illegal war. And then we had Afghanistan, and then we had Iraq, and now we have the whole situation in the Ukraine. I believe Russia was left with no choice whatsoever but to act in the Crimea, because what happened was, George, in the Crimea was a democratically elected government that was elected by the people, for the people, was overthrown by what can be described as a coalition of neoliberals and neo-Nazis.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about that. They can't even begin to deny that one. Niall, it's a pleasure. I'm cutting you short only because there are so many people calling this special anniversary show, including Reem, who's in North Carolina in the United States of America. Reem, welcome to the show.
Yes, assalamu alaikum, George.
Wa alaikum salam. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Let me comment on the issue of the David Cameron visit fast. Whatever political reason he has behind it, but nevertheless, extremely bad speech. And shortly, David Cameron, you sucked. I mean, any fair person will be against the occupation that lasted 47 years. They are still practicing terrorism against the Palestinians and acting as victims all over the world. And regarding the boycott, extremely for it, of course. I mean, according to Ma'arif newspaper, they reported $30 million loss. Well, great. Hope it continues and spreads. One last thing, just opening, broadening eyes. I know you like to think outside the box, but why suddenly making products and have it printed as made in Israel or the occupation of Israel? Why suddenly? I mean, we know that so many companies all over the world with all the brand names and all that have the owners. We know that they support Israel and they send probably their profit there. So why suddenly opening up? That's something to think about.
Yes, it is. In fact, we could get stickers saying there's blood on those oranges and stick them on Jaffa oranges. We could get stickers saying there's blood on these dates, there's blood on these artichokes, there's blood on these vegetables that are being sold in our supermarkets. We should go around sticking them on those products. At the very least, it'll give somebody work going around to take them off again. Reem is in North Carolina in the United States, and that's been a fantastic tour de horizon. And we're back in London to talk to Douale on the very same subjects of sanctions, but this time on the EU sanctions. Douale, welcome.
Thank you, Press TV again. George, just a quick one regarding the Russian, the Ukrainian problem that is going on and that's escalating. It's just I'm not for the American side, or not the American side, but the influence from the West and the Russians. I think the Ukrainians have to be left alone and left to their business and not be basically pushed and pressurized from either end. End of the day, there's two basically speaking people in there, and they should solve this problem peacefully. Without, it was the Americans that have been funding a lot of money, or was it the West that has been funding a lot of money?
$5 billion. The U.S. alone gave $5 billion, according to their own ambassador, to the Ukrainian opposition.
Yeah, absolutely wrong. That was absolutely wrong, and it's not $5 million in aid or nothing, but it's money to basically change them and make Ukraine part of NATO. But at the same time, Russia has always been involved in stopping gas and stuff like that. So they're not really innocent in it as well. So my point is, small countries like Ukraine and other countries across the world that are being used as proxies by major powers or superpowers, whatever we call them, it just has to stop. And people in the world have to live, and my point is just let them live.
Well, the problem, brother, is, first of all, Ukraine is not a small country. Its population is the same as Britain's population almost, and that's not a small population. Secondly, it's too late to say leave them alone to sort out their problems now, because the problems they have now are because they were not left alone. The US subversion, destabilization of Ukraine has produced a certain political outcome, which is a government claiming legitimacy but having no elected authority in Kiev, which is rejected by 47% at least of the population of the country. You see, the Russian speakers and ethnic Russians were ready to live in Ukraine when there was a Soviet Union, because it didn't really matter which part of the Soviet Union you lived in. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they found themselves, the Russian-speaking 47%, as a minority in a new country. Now, they could also live with that as long as the Ukraine had a government that was ready to work with both sides, the European Union and Russia, and was not ready to be a base for the European Union and NATO. But now we have a coup government in Kiev, which is openly saying, send us your rockets and make a base here in the Ukraine. And the Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine can't accept that, and you can't imagine or expect Russia to accept it. Thanks for the call. All the way to Canada now. Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's Gary. He knows what he's talking about. Gary, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, Gary.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you, sir. Welcome to this anniversary show.
Absolutely. It's an honor. It's just an honor. I'm so happy to be on.
Thank you.
And it couldn't have happened at a more appropriate moment than the aftermath of this Cameron display in Israel.
Even the Prime Minister of Canada would have had to work hard to outdo David Cameron yesterday.
I think so. What I'm excited about is this prospect. We know the modern day source of this problem. There was an event 97 years ago called the Balfour Declaration, and it has never been rescinded.
No.
So on November 2nd of 2017 will be the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, and I would like to launch a 1 billion signature global petition requesting that the British government rescind the Balfour Declaration.
That's a very good idea. I don't think we should set the number at 1 billion, though we ought to be able to get 1 billion. There's 2 billion Muslims alone. Never mind all the hundreds of millions of non-Muslims who feel the same way as us. But I do think a campaign running up to 2017, the centenary of this dastardly crime that British imperialism committed against the Palestinian people is a very good idea, Gary. Let's get together behind the scenes, online, and try and launch that. See if we can get funding for that. See if we can get a secretariat that could actually organize that across the world. Great thinking, Gary. Thanks very much indeed for that call from Canada. I'm racing through the calls because it's a special evening. I want as many on as possible. Fatima is on the line in Nigeria. Fatima, welcome to the show. Thanks for ringing.
Hi.
Go ahead, sister. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much. Go on.
Oh, anyway, I'm very happy to be on air with you. I hope this my call will make a change. I'm calling on Press TV to make your program twice a week, because really we need to make an alliance of the same against the insane worldwide. And your program once a week is not enough. So I'm really calling on Press TV to make a program twice a week.
Excellent. Well, I would do it. I would do it twice a week. I think it is a university of the airwaves. I think it is a world parliament. The countries that we've talked to just this evening, including your good self, Fatima, in Nigeria, prove that all over the world, people are interested in the things that we are discussing and the way we are discussing them. And thanks to Press TV, we have to, because of course, there would be no comment if it were not for Press TV, and there would be no Press TV if it were not for the Islamic Republic of Iran. Hallelujah. I salute them. Thanks, Fatima, for the call. Jeff is in the UK. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome, sir. Go ahead.
And it's great to be on this anniversary edition. I think it's 300 episodes.
It'll be remembered, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it's amazing for any show, but for one like this one,
Indeed.
which really has had everything against it.
Yeah, and absolutely live. I've no idea what you're going to say before you say it. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to say, I think this obviously ridiculous statement of Cameron's that he's made as Israeli jets bombed the Gaza Strip today.
Yeah.
I think I mean, you're right, it's so absurd. I mean, even if we were to accept, for argument's sake, and I'm not accepting it, but if we were, that Russia deserved to be sanctioned or boycotted, it's strange because there's really little that we could hope to achieve because Russia doesn't get most of its resources or its profits or what it needs from us.
Indeed.
But
it's the other way around.
Yes,
we're actually sanctioning ourselves.
Absolutely, and Russia is a huge country. Israel is a very small country, and it gets all of its sustenance and what it needs from us. And that's the true, absurdity of what he said, really, George. I mean, think about it. I mean, if the West were to propose cutting off, a fraction of the aid that Israel receives, I mean, if Obama were to make that telephone call tomorrow, I think Netanyahu would phone back, and, you'd find that the conflict had been settled. I mean, Israel...
Well, or he'd be overthrown.
Yes,
I mean,
overthrown.
You've identified perfectly, if I may say so, you've identified perfectly this conundrum, that Russia is not vulnerable to EU sanctions. The EU will be sanctioning themselves, even if you accept that they've done anything that deserves sanctioning. The state that they call Israel, this apartheid Zionist settler state, is utterly vulnerable to boycott and sanction, and the Western governments could force it overnight or within a week to actually do what international law demands that they must do. Jeff, thanks for that call. Herhatch is in Lebanon on the subject of EU sanctions. Herhatch, if I'm pronouncing your name properly, thanks very much for ringing from Lebanon. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. George Galloway. I would like to congratulate you, Press TV, and all the staff for the 300th edition.
Thank you so much.
First question, what happened to the February agreement between the Russians and the Europeans?
It was broken by the European Union leaders who sat there in a solemn and binding discussion with the then president of the Ukraine and signed an agreement which was broken within hours by the mob, and the recognition of the mob swiftly followed. That's what happened.
Okay, the second question.
Yeah.
If they were so democratically elected, why they are banning the Russian language, the native Russian language?
With all the problems that the Ukraine has, it's virtually bankrupt, by the way. Their first act was to ban not just the Russian language, but the Polish language as well. They banned Polish, they banned Russian. When at least 47% of the population are Russian speakers and at least 5% of the population are Polish speakers. That was their first action. Herr Hatch, I've got to press on, but thanks for calling, because we're running towards the end of the 300th edition. Abdul is in Reading in England. Probably be the last caller. Abdul, go ahead.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good, fighting fit, ready for another 300 editions. Volunteering for a second one every week. Go on.
Thank you. Well, with regard to the British Prime Minister visit to Israel and his statements, it doesn't surprise me, but I have always wondered what power Israel has over European countries and certainly the U.S.
Yeah.
To such an extent that the leaders of those countries have to visit Israel before elections to show their support. I mean, we Arabs should have this power because we control most of the energy resources in the world, but maybe...
And most of the sovereign wealth. Most of the sovereign wealth.
Yeah, but because we are divided, I mean, Saudi and Qatari dispute is an example. But I want to say one thing very quickly, George, if you allow me.
Yes.
Regarding the Israeli-Arab conflict, I think there are standards that have to be met to win a victory, for example. The examples of these standards are mercy, justice. I think the Arabs nowadays don't have those standards. We don't deserve victory, to be honest. For example, look at what Salah ad-Din did when he entered Jerusalem. I mean, he gave the criminals justice and showed mercy to the people. I mean, God knows what Arabs will do if they win a similar victory. But I think I lost hope in the current.
No,
generation.
don't lose hope, Abdul. You make some powerful points. We don't have time to properly deal with them, but it ought to be the case that David Cameron is visiting the Arab capitals and telling the Arab audiences how he's going to come to the aid of the Palestinians, because the Arabs are potentially far more powerful in the world than the Zionists. The question is, as you say, a question of unity, integrity, and faith. Well, it's been a phenomenal 300 editions. I pray to God that I'm still around to present 300 more. It's been marvelous.